Let me tell you something strange about not being liked. We live in a world that tells you if people don't like you, something must be wrong, that popularity is proof of goodness, that approval is evidence of worth. Yet some of the most authentic people you know are quietly misunderstood, quietly excluded, quietly misread. And here's the question that lingers beneath that discomfort. What if people not liking you isn't a failure, but a mirror? It's easy to assume rejection means deficiency, that you talked too much or too little, that you were too intense, too sensitive, too different. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology unfolding, a quiet dance between identity and expectation, a subtle tension between belonging and self-definition. See, for some people, being disliked is not about being wrong. It's about being visible in a way that disrupts comfort. You felt it before. You enter a room and sense something shift. Conversations tighten slightly. Smiles feel polite but measured. You speak and someone misinterprets your tone. You stay quiet and someone assumes you're distant. You try to adjust, or maybe you don't. And either way, something about you doesn't quite settle into the group. From the outside, they might say you're intimidating, or aloof, or intense, or too much. But here's what's fascinating. Psychologists have long observed that social rejection is not only about behavior, it's about perceived threat. Not physical threat, psychological threat. You don't have to be aggressive to unsettle people. You just have to be different in a way that reflects something back to them. Sometimes people don't like you because you hold boundaries they haven't learned to hold. Sometimes they don't like you because you say what they only think. Sometimes they don't like you because your confidence exposes their insecurity. And here's the paradox. The more individuated you become, the more solid in your own identity, the more polarizing you can appear. It's not about being unkind, it's about being defined. And in a world that rewards blending in, definition can feel sharp. But let's go deeper. For some, the experience of being disliked begins early. A classroom where your curiosity was labeled disruptive, a family where your sensitivity was called dramatic, a friend group where your ambition was framed as arrogance. You learned quickly, belonging has rules. Tone it down, smile more, be agreeable, don't outshine, don't question. So you adapted. We all do. Social psychology calls this self-monitoring, the subtle art of adjusting yourself to fit the room. It's a survival skill, an intelligent one. But here's what's often misunderstood. When you suppress too much of yourself to be liked, you don't actually gain connection, you gain approval. And approval is not the same thing as intimacy. Approval says you are acceptable. Intimacy says you are known. Sometimes, when people don't like you, it's because you stopped performing for approval. You stopped shrinking. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped laughing at jokes that made you uncomfortable. And without the performance, some relationships quietly loosen. Because let's be honest, we live in systems that subtly reward sameness. Workplaces reward conformity, masked as teamwork. Social circles reward shared opinions, disguised as harmony. Online spaces reward algorithms of agreement. So when you introduce complexity, when you hold nuance, when you resist easy categorization, you interrupt the rhythm. An interruption can feel like rejection, but maybe it's differentiation. Here's something even more interesting. Research on group dynamics shows that people unconsciously protect group identity. When someone embodies values or traits that challenge the norm, the group often responds with subtle exclusion, not out of cruelty, but out of preservation. It's not personal, it's structural. The nervous system of a group works like the nervous system of a body. It resists what feels unfamiliar. So if you're innovative in a traditional space, if you're calm in a chaotic one, if you're ambitious in a complacent one, if you're introspective in a superficial one, you might be misread. And here's the question that deepens everything. What if disapproval is first and foremost a signal of difference, not of deficiency? Because think about it. When was the last time someone disliked you for something you secretly value about yourself? Your independence, your honesty, your depth, your refusal to gossip. What if the very traits that isolate you in one room are the ones that align you in another? But not everyone who is disliked is simply misunderstood. Sometimes, yes, we carry rough edges, unhealed wounds, defensive tones, unconscious projections. We all do. And this is where the work becomes quiet and honest. There's a difference between being rejected for your authenticity and being rejected for your unexamined pain. The challenge is discerning which is which. This is where psychology meets philosophy, because at its core, the fear of being disliked is not about reputation, it's about survival. Our brains are wired for belonging. Rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The amygdala flares, cortisol rises, the body interprets exclusion as danger. So when someone doesn't like you, it can feel existential. But here's the paradox. The very capacity to be disliked is evidence of individuation. If everyone likes you, it often means you are universally agreeable, and universal agreeability usually requires dilution. Watered-down personalities rarely offend. They also rarely transform. There's a deep philosophical undertone here. In a world that constantly says, be liked, choosing to be fully yourself becomes an act of self-definition. It doesn't mean being abrasive. It doesn't mean being indifferent. It means allowing polarity, because any strong signal creates contrast. Light creates shadow. Conviction creates disagreement. Clarity creates division. And maybe that's not dysfunction. Maybe that's mathematics. The longer you live with the experience of being disliked, the more you begin to see something subtle. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Not every room is meant to hold you. Not every circle is aligned with your direction. And perhaps the discomfort you feel is not evidence that you're wrong, but that you're early, or different, or simply not for them. Studies on self-concept and congruence show that people who act in alignment with their values, even at the cost of social approval, tend to report higher long-term well-being. There is something stabilizing about integrity. When who you are and how you behave match, the nervous system relaxes, even if the room doesn't. Incongruence creates anxiety. Congruence creates quiet strength. Sometimes the most misunderstood person in the room is simply the least willing to fragment themselves. Their presence feels solid, and solidity can be unsettling to those still negotiating who they are. Maybe that's what real confidence looks like, not universal admiration, but internal coherence. The ability to say, "This is who I am," without demanding applause. There's something sacred about that. To exist without constant editing, to speak without scanning every face for approval, to hold your posture even when the room tilts slightly away. It's not defiance, it's alignment. So the next time you feel the sting of being disliked, maybe pause before turning it into self-rejection. Maybe ask, is this feedback for growth, or is this friction from difference? And maybe you don't need to solve it immediately. Maybe it's enough to sit with the possibility that being disliked is not a verdict, it's information. Information about compatibility, about values, about direction. And maybe, just maybe, the goal was never to be liked by everyone. Maybe the goal was to be known by the right ones. Because in the end, being disliked doesn't mean you're unworthy. It might mean you're distinct. And distinction always carries risk, but it also carries truth. So if some people don't like you, perhaps it's not a sign that you should shrink. Perhaps it's a sign that you're finally taking shape. And shape, by its very nature, cannot fit every outline.